Welcome. This is Huntley Hope. Gang violence has risen sharply, especially in large cities. It is estimated that over 1.5 million people are members of the roughly 35,000 different gangs operating in the U.S.
The second most gang-infested city in America is Los Angeles, California. Now, one man is trying to make a difference in his community is Father Gregory Boyle of Homeboy Industries, located in Los Angeles. And it's a multifaceted organization that provides not only work opportunities for those recently incarcerated, but Maggie, so much more.
Absolutely. I caught up with Father Gregory Boyle. Here's our conversation. Father Boyle, thank you so much for joining us today.
My privilege.
It truly is an honor to chat with you. Did you ever think that you would be sitting here many years later knowing that you were part of starting the largest gang intervention program ever?
No, people come to our headquarters, which is our fourth headquarters, and it's quite large, and, 500 people mill around there at any given moment. And people say, how did you think this up? And you don't. You back your way into stuff, you evolve. You try to respond as best you can to the thing that's right in front of you, and then you respond to the next thing right in front of you. So the whole thing is a little bit on a country road with no lights, and all you can move is as far as your headlights can illuminate, and that's sort of how it evolved. Then there you are, So nobody conceived it, much less me.
You say respond, but I think many people try to respond to issues and problems, but you've done it successfully. Do you have a secret? How did this happen?
Well, I think you have to listen, because it's the difference between humility and hubris. Humility asks people on the margins or the poor, what would help you? And hubris says, here's what your problem is, and here's how you can fix yourself, and here's what you need to do. And for too long, the outsider view drives the inside of how we address these complex social dilemmas. So the more people can listen to the poor, the greater chance they'll have of together arriving at some kind of effective solution.
Describe Homeboy and Homegirl Industries today.
Well, we're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So we get about 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors seeking our services. Or most of them want to be gang members in any case, want to enter our 18-month training program because that's a paid program. So they're in the process. So that brings in lots of people. So drug testing, orientation, selection committee, there's a waiting period, as well as all our services, tattoo removal, therapy, case management, and then all the different training programs. So people come from all over. So there are 120,000 gang members in Los Angeles County, which is quite large, and 1,100 gangs. So it's a pretty daunting social dilemma.
How many young people have gone through your program?
I have no idea. Thousands and upon thousands, So we're in our 28th year. So originally it was when I was pastor of a very poor parish. We had 8 gangs. So the services of the program tried to address the needs of those members of those 8 gangs. And then it grew, and now we serve the whole county.
Let's go back in history a little. When you were growing up in L.A., what were your plans? What did you dream of becoming and doing?
Well, certainly not this. I was educated by the Jesuits, so I wanted to become a Jesuit because they were joyful and prophetic, which was a nice combo burger, They were hilarious and always happy. And it was during the time of the Vietnam War, so they were always dragging us to protests, and people were getting arrested, and I sort of liked that. It felt like that's how the gospel ought to be lived, It should be sort of a denunciation and a proclamation. But I never intended to do what I'm doing, I wanted to work with the poor, and I learned Spanish, so that kind of pointed me where I ended up serving. And then I started to bury kids in 1988, and quite a few of them. And so it was an issue you could either bury your head in the sand, or you roll up your sleeves, So so it was a thing that presented itself, and I never would have, especially growing up in LA, which is the gang capital of the world. I grew up there, but in a part of town that would have not had any exposure to violence or all the precarity of the poorer zip codes.
You had a dream of actually serving in Bolivia, but you were sent to Dolores Mission, as you mentioned.
Well, I went to Bolivia and I loved it there, but I got sick. I had to come home. In fact, that was the first time I ever came to Toronto was when I flew home. For some reason, that was how I was going to New York. So that was my first visit to Toronto. But I was quite sick. And so that kind of changed my heart. I was supposed to go to one of our universities, and it wasn't enough for me. So I asked my provincial if I could go to the poorest place we had, and so I went to Dolores Mission.
You actually asked to go to the poorest place?
Yeah, and that was a parish we had, and I spoke Spanish, so it seemed natural.
Why did you want to go there? Why did you ask to go to the poorest place?
Well, Bolivia sort of converted me. I mean, I felt like there was some kind of privileged perch, being in among the poor, that I felt that somehow my own salvation was wrapped up in it, that I was learning something, and that constantly learning and constantly being liberated. And so, though I couldn't do it in Bolivia anymore, this was the next best thing. And so then I've been there really for 30 years now. In that community, living there and then working in the city.
When you entered that community and saw the need and the struggle, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, initially, the gang thing didn't present itself. It was, I was there for a couple of years, and it was immigration, kind of draconian immigration laws were happening at that point. And so we declared ourselves a sanctuary. We opened our doors to undocumented men and women who slept on church property, in the church and in a convent. And then, but by 88 was when I started to bury kids. And then from 88 to 98 was really this decade of death. 1992 was the high mark, the moment when we had 1,000 gang-related homicides in LA County. So that was really a terrible time. But it was a time when this response was born, 88.
And reading in your book, you would ride around on your bicycle trying to stop these gang wars, essentially, just trying to spread peace any way that you could.
Yeah, well, the bike was sort of, my parish were these two housing projects, and they were quite large and dense. And so I had a bike that I used to steal bikes. So that was, someone would say...
A Jesuit priest stealing bikes?
They would say there's a shooting over in Pico Gardens. I say, hey, give me your bike, I'll bring it right back. And so I did that, and I was sort of famous for that. So I was always borrowing bikes. I always returned them. And then one day, I got a call saying, there's a big fight in the park. So I ran over to the park, and all these homies had this bike with a big bow on it, brand new bike. So that was my bike that I rode for the rest of my years there. So it was kind of a shuttle diplomacy. Sometimes it was middle of the night, put that Uzi down. Are you sure you want to shoot that guy?
But
sometimes it was mainly just to kind of check in with folks and take the temperature and that kind of thing.
But you say in the book that maybe in hindsight it wasn't the smartest thing to do to
I think what I referred to in the book is the peace treaties and truces and ceasefires, because I don't regret that I did it, but I'm convinced that I would never do it again, because it sort of served the cohesion of the gang. It kind of co-signed on something. And it had a notion of gang as sort of nation state, this maybe this is the Middle East, maybe this is Northern Ireland, maybe if we sat people down. And the misconception there is that gang violence is not about conflict. There's no conflict in it. There's violence, but it's not about anything. It's not, we want to, practice our religion freely, or we would like our land back. There's no issue. It's the language of the despondent. So I ceased to do that. And I speak against that, when cities want to put that overlay on it and say, well, what if we got them together to talk stuff out? And I go, well, then you don't understand what gang violence is about. It's about the lethal absence of hope. And so address the hope, infuse hope into a community where that's foreign. That will eliminate the violence. But the minute you try to address it head on as if you could talk your way out of it, that's the outsider view, I think, driving the inside of what we do.
Dolores' mission, what I was moved by is the fact that this is a community of people that really love their community. It seems like it's a church that really wants to be a light, a beacon of light in the middle of a lot of darkness. You talk in the book about starting an alternative school for these kids that were being kicked out. How important was that?
Well, that was the first thing we did because they were really what we would call in the States, junior high, middle school age kids, So they were quite young, and the junior highs couldn't deal with them anymore, and no school would take them. And consequently, they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls, selling drugs, and they were violent. So that was clearly an issue, rather than tell them stop being violent. I'd go out to them. I said, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And I couldn't find a school that would take them, so we started one. And then that brought gang members to the church, and then they said if only we had jobs, and then we tried to find them. And so all those things, one thing led to another, that we were always trying to address. What do you think would be helpful, and trying to get at it underneath it, rather than, understanding that the violence was about something else. So what if we addressed the despair? What if we addressed the trauma and the damage they've had to endure? What if we addressed even the mental health issues that became apparent?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we proceeded.
It started off, it was called Jobs for a Future.
In 1988, we called it Jobs for a Future because we just tried to place gang members in gainful employment. So we went out and pleaded with employers. And then by 92, once we started our social enterprises, beginning with Homeboy Bakery, and then once we had plural, we had Homeboy Tortilla in another location. Once we had plural, we changed our name to Homeboy Industries. So, but we also changed how we operated. We used to say in the early days, nothing stops a bullet like a job. The idea being job for gang member, go. Okay, next. Oh, hey, this is a career, go. But then what wasn't happening was there was no healing. There was no gaining of resilience. There was no re-identifying who they are in the world. And when somebody threw a monkey wrench or his lady leaves him, he was right back at, you would call it relapse if it were about drug addiction. So we've changed how we operate. It's now we have this therapeutic community where healing is kind of the order of the day. That the only person who won't reoffend and go back to prison is the person who's experienced healing, not the employed person. Jobs are nice, but healing is forever. So you want to make sure that happens, and attachment repair and somehow coming to terms with what's been done to you and with what you've done. So all that is kind of what we do now. So it feels kind of creaky to hear nothing stops a bullet like a job. That was on our T-shirt in the early days. And now it's about community trumps gang. Community heals. And it's a community of tenderness, so it's compelling.
Maggie, we're going to have more of your interview with Father Gregory Boyle in just a moment. The comment, lethal absence of hope. And if you don't, you have to have hope, but then he also talks about healing as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes Homeboy Industries and the ministry of Father Gregory Boyle and this mission so great, and why so many people around the world kind of keep an eye on this, is because they have found a way of not just finding these guys jobs and women jobs, but giving them hope, giving them healing. The book is amazing of how he shares how people have actually change their lives around for good. And I think that's what makes his ministry so great.
It absolutely does. And, we want to continue to tell these stories of hope. Maybe you've got somebody in your family that's a gang member or have come out of a very dysfunctional, life, and you need that hope. Give our prayer lines a call, 1-866-273-4444. And also keep us strong, and we'll have more of that great interview in just a moment, so stay tuned.
God's love is like a fire. When it ignites and when it spreads, it can transform anyone.
I called 100 Huntley Street the prayer line, and that was a real turning point in my salvation.
We serve a God who can take the ashes, the broken pieces of our life, and he can make something beautiful.
I said, God, if you're this real, I will do anything that you want me to do.
God's love story can inspire anyone to make a difference in the lives of people around the world.
We are very sure, we are very optimistic about our future because we know we will plant, we will have water to drink.
You become influential by setting a new pace. The gospel is timeless.
Every single person has a story, but we're all part of God's greater story, which is the greatest story of all. And we thank you so much for your support of this ministry and all that we do here at Crossroads. Well, right now, with a man from Los Angeles who facilitates 1,000 recently incarcerated gang members each week who are looking to turn their lives around, we continue my conversation with Father Gregory Boyle from Homeboy Industries. How does God play a role in that healing?
Well, again, I'm sort of the school that has a hard time, separating things. I remember the Bush administration years ago came sniffing around and thinking, well, this might be a program as a faith-based. And so I remember once they asked me, what do you do here? And so I did the litany of things from tattoo removal to training to school to anger management to, substance abuse attention and all sorts of things in our businesses. And once I'd finished this litany, they said, yeah, but could you talk about the spiritual part? And I said, I thought I just did. And that's sort of the notion at Homeboy, that, unless the help is concrete, Jesus isn't interested. There's no sense of how do you separate out the spiritual part when the place is soaked with that spirit. And I think that's as it ought to be, that in the end, it's people putting first things recognizably first and people choosing to live as though the truth were true. It's not about, now let's take this moment out, and I think that's the hope. I think that's God's hope, that that's what you would do.
What is it like to look into the eyes of a person when they've come through the doors and they've said, I'm tired of living this life, and to see that light switch go on and realize I have to get out? What is that like?
Well, it's kind of on a continuum. It's, if you were to go to an AA meeting, who's there? Somebody who's 20 years sober, somebody who's 20 minutes sober, and somebody who's drunk. Yeah. And that's kind of what Homeboy's like. People are at different places. Some are more solid, some are more precarious. But they're there, In our businesses, our supervisors, they don't do this so much anymore, but they'd call and say, that guy Mario you sent us, he doesn't want to be here. I go, well, where is he? Here. I go, well, trust me, if he didn't want to be there, I know he's obnoxious and belligerent and hard-headed, but he's there. Now, he may not be at a place of full consciousness of his own recovery and his own healing, but he's there. He shows up, Our program is not for those who need help. It's only for those who want it. You have to walk in the door, but once you do, it's red carpet and ticker tape parade because we know how significant it is. Like tattoo removal, we remove, something like 30,000 tattoos a year. And that's significant because you're sending a message to friend and foe alike that this is not who I am anymore. You know, you're sending a message to your kids. And it's painful, and it takes a very long time. And some places, you know, demand stuff, payment or community service hours. We know how significant it is that somebody has asked to do this, that we don't want to have any kind of thing that impedes them from doing it, because we know, we value how significant it is, you know. So.
In the book, this was printed in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So you had, I think it was 167 people that you had buried at that point. Obviously, it's more by now.
203.
Wow. And there were a few that stood out to you where you actually cried. Something was stirred in you to show more emotion than maybe for others. Is there one person, or, and I know this is hard to say, but that has really just hurt you to see that person, such a bright future, such promise, and to see that person gone?
Well, you know people better than other people, you know. And, you know, it's like anybody who's close to you, somebody who you have history with, long, long history. There's a kid in the book, Moreno. I won't tell the whole story, but he was in a biology class after having not been in school for a long time, and nothing was exciting him. But he liked biology because on Monday we're going to digest a frog, he said. And I won't say the rest because it's foul. But that kid I had to bury since the book. And I spent some time in the book on him because he was a kind of a fixture. Because he was undocumented, we could never send him to another job beyond Homeboy. So he was around for a while. And I'd seen him grow, and I'd seen him become a father. And I saw him inhabit the truth of who he was. That was a devastating death. It was right at Christmas time. He was playing football with a whole bunch of people in front of his house, and somebody came by and saw him, and who knows, but opened up fire. But because that death was so devastating in our office, you know, I remember speaking to everybody, you know, and saying, it reminds us that you have to compile these two essential lists, you know. What are the fates that are worse than death? And what are the things that are more powerful than death? And Moreno knew when he died, as he used to say to me, because his brother was killed and I buried him, death is a punk, he said, which is a good way to see it. You know, it's kind of, he was able to put death in its place. And to know that, knowing the truth of who he was and loving as he had been loved and loving his 3 kids more than he hates his enemies, all those things were more powerful than death. So he knew that list. And if you don't have that list compiled, death will come and you'll be toppled by it, you know. You'll even be toppled by life if you haven't made those lists abundantly clear to yourself. And so not knowing the truth of who you are is a fate worse than death. But, you know, it's just a fact of nature that you're going to feel some deaths more keenly than others, only because you know people more keenly than others, you know. And because I run a really large gang intervention program, I get asked to bury gang members, you know, and sometimes you're only peripherally connected, you know, you know the homies of that guy. Or you encounter churches that refuse to bury gang members. That's happened. And so they know that I will. And so that's kind of how that happens, I think.
Where does hope play a role in all of this?
Well, at Homeboy, you know, kind of our new motto is hope has an address, you know, and because if the problem is about a lethal absence of hope, well, then how do you infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign? You know, you want to, because there's something very compelling about the place. So if they come in there, you're going to feel it. It's palpable. You feel the power of real community. And you discover how bankrupt and shallow and empty that previous community of the gang life, how conditional that love is. One false move and you're out. And you thought these guys had your back forever. And in fact, they don't. So we talk a lot at Homeboy about the no matter whatness of God, that no matter what, that this is an unshakable love and will never be withdrawn. But you want people to have that experience in the community at Homeboy, in a place of tenderness. So if love is the answer, community is the context. But tenderness is the only way that becomes connective tissue. Otherwise, love stays in the air or in your head or in your heart. But unless it translates into tenderness, then it doesn't connect people. And once you have a taste of that, that's just undeniable. And that's what fills people with hope. It's not like potential. It's not, we think we'll be able to get you a job. It's more the hope that sustains you while you're waiting for a job. And that's kind of key. And you feel it with each other. And you feel it exquisitely mutual. And people connect. And it's powerful.
Last question. What is probably the biggest lesson you've learned from Homeboy Industries, from the young men and young women that you've been able to journey with?
Probably, that saving lives is for the Coast Guard. I'm kind of not interested in it. And I think this is meant to be oddly sort of selfish, that you're meant to sort of save your life. And otherwise, you can't be in a place of humility. Gang members, they've saved my life. They've taught me everything of value. Standing at the margins has filled me in a way that, when you initially think you want to set the world on fire, but instead you accompany people, you listen to people, you allow yourself to be transformed by people. That's a different mode. And no amount of me wanting that guy to have a life will ever be the same as him wanting to have one. So in the meantime, you just love. And you know how powerful that is. And, but only he can decide to do that, And it was crazy making in my early days, where you tried to save lives. And I don't do it anymore. I just try to let myself be reached by people. And the irony, of course, is that when you do that, people get saved. Everybody gets saved, and they feel they inhabit their truth. And it doesn't get better.
Thank you, Father Boyle.
Thank you. My privilege.
What an amazing guy. When I was in Winnipeg, we worked with, gang members and people coming into the church, and it was always so sad when they didn't make it. And I was just thinking of, Father Gregory, over 200 funerals.
Wow. Yeah, it was such a beautiful time spending with Father Gregory Boyle. I felt like I could just sit at his feet because there's so much wisdom. But I love what he said at the end, saving lives are for the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
We can't save a life, but we can lead, we can give information. And that's really what he's dedicated his life to for these guys.
And he could wallow in, all the disappointment, but God has given him the grace in the midst of, there are victories and there looks like there's defeats, but he hangs in there. And we want to be there for you. So if you're going through something today, give us a call, 1-866-273-4444, our prayer lines. Thank you for watching Huntley Hope. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a member of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2.